Over the last week, I watched a few films. One dealt with the nature of man, the contemplation of right and wrong, about the power for man to destroy itself and the resulting fallout. And the other was a politically ham-fisted woke comedy that masquerades as satire, Barbie. This film seems to have divided the internet, with discussions surrounding what was the film's message. What is it trying to say? Is Greta Gerwig secretly making fun of woke people? Or is she preaching that very exact philosophy? Despite all the criticism, Barbie seems to be doing well, making a ton of money and earning positive reviews from critics and mostly positive reviews from audiences. But the topic of what a film promotes versus what a film simply shows versus what a film condemns is an interesting topic. The good, bad, and the ugly. Thus this video's existence. To put it bluntly, I did not like Barbie. It's not really that funny, the story's just about mediocre, and its insistence to stop everything, to just sit down and lecture the audience about the patriarchy, is lazy. Ultimately, your enjoyment of the film will come down to your personal politics, which to me is the most boring type of story to exist.
As Vice Chairman, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. All right, next.
Before I begin the review, I must address one small point. I am not the quote-unquote target audience. This film is made for women, so who am I, a man, to speak on this film? I know many reviewers have prefaced their review with this very sentiment.
Things like, look, this movie wasn't made for me. Or one that's derivative, look, I'm obviously not the target audience for this.
But even I, as somebody who I don't believe that I'm necessarily the target market for this film, I think this film is very much primarily aimed at women.
I mean, obviously this film is not really marketed towards us. It's not especially written for, straight men. Imagine that.
I, however, will not. I saw the film, and I am reviewing the film. This sentiment is exactly what I fought against in my Brie Larson video. By attaching an identity to this film, and specifically only caring about a target audience, all outside criticism can be simply dismissed by the basis of identity. Brie Larson attempted to do this with Wrinkle in Time, but she was unsuccessful. However, this time, it seems to have worked. Obviously, if this logic is taken to its conclusion, that means certain people's opinions only matters on certain types of films. And I can guarantee when this exact argument is made in reverse, it will only be met with outrage. We don't do this with most films anyway.
By the people that these films were made for. I do not need a 40-year-old white dude to tell me what didn't work for him about A Wrinkle in Time. It wasn't made for him.
Shut up, bitch!
People's reviews should be based off their reasoning, not of their identity. I understand that there will be things in this film that primarily appeal to women compared to men. However, this really applies on the macro scale. On an individual scale, it should not. For example, just because a film primarily caters to or interests men does not mean that a woman's criticism is less important, or that a woman in question should avoid speaking on the film in the first place. Her opinion and discussion should be evaluated based off the reasoning and the evidence. To say that a certain woman's reviews surrounding a film with a target audience of man could not be more in-depth or have more interesting views than a specific man is stupid. And so is the vice versa. Besides, there's a ton of films with the target audience being kids, but guess what? It's still adults who review the films.
3 Toy Stories have the complete package, and so to me it's about which Toy Story is the best Toy Stories, and that's...
Barbie is, well, about Barbie, or in this case, stereotypical Barbie. She exists in Barbie Land, a matriarchy where all Barbies are important and powerful, which leads to a perfect society with no issues, no turmoil, and no problems. The Kens do exist, but they don't really matter. The Kens exist to just ogle Barbie, I guess.
I walk out in the backyard, and do you know where I found Ken, Jimmy? Face down in the mud next to a squish lemon.
And this is the photo. You took a photo of it.
But issues start to pop up. Her feet go flat. She has cellulite, and now she thinks of dying. She is quested to go into the real world and to resolve the issues. Have questions? Well, it's a wacky comedy, so don't think about it. And so, into the real world she goes, which is a patriarchy. Oh boy. I said it before, and I will say it again. This film just smacks you in the face with partisan politics, quickly making the film lose any interesting qualities. It honestly just smacks you upside the head, point blank. The real world is a mix of pure absurdity and then shifts to be realistic when the necessity arises. It's a sleight of hand, used to convince you that yes, the patriarchy is a serious threat, by overplaying the sexism to such an absurd degree. It is a patriarchy, but it's a patriarchy that's well hidden. But at the same time, women hold all the positions of power that men do. Actually, wait, they don't. Looking back, it's rather hard to take any concrete examples away from the film. I mean, Ken learns self-respect, confidence, and the drive to execute. And Barbie faces some terrible behavior, but most of it is just random strangers making rude comments towards her. At this point, it's really worth questioning who actually is the one who faces true oppression in this film. Spoiler alert, it's not Barbie. I have a hard time believing that the brief time Barbie spends in the real world means she has enough experience to relate to the speech made later on in the film. More on that later. Eventually, Barbie and Ken take different things from the real world. Ken learns what it means to be respected, to be a man. Or rather, he learns toxic masculinity and goes back to Barbie Land to liberate the Kens. My bad. He goes to subjugate the Barbies with patriarchy. Meanwhile, Barbie learns that the real world, with all of its aches and pains, still contains an authenticity hard to leave, even with all its issues. This is where the film truly takes a turn for the worst, where a mother gives a speech about how hard it is to be a woman under the patriarchy, which wakes the Barbies from their slumber to defeat Ken. But how? Barbie Land is a matriarchy. The Barbies in question do not know any of the struggles she's talking about. They are free to do as they wish. If anything, this speech probably applies more to the Kens. Barbies come in all shapes and sizes. Ironically, it's the Kens who are all picture perfect in shape. Even despite this making no sense within the context of the story, it is still used as the ultimate weapon to defeat the patriarchy itself, and is at the heart of the film. Am I really supposed to believe that the half-day Barbie spends under the Kens was enough to learn about the entire experience of being a woman in the Western world in the 21st century and all of the extremely specific situations the mother brings up? But it's a comedy, so don't think too deeply about it. This film has abandoned all illusions of subtlety for this one speech, and it hurts the film. This speech could be completely divorced from the movie itself and simply just played at a gender studies seminar where it would probably be better suited. After this point, the film makes its largest error yet. Eventually, the Barbies trick the Kens, and instead of shooting for equality, just reinstate Barbie Land. Barbie then tells Ken that he needs to find who he is by himself and not in relation to Barbie. And this is where I lost it. After this, she goes back to the real world. I wonder if she let Ken keep the house she just kicked him out of to end up not using, but I don't know, probably went to Alan or something. But this is bullshit. It's exactly because of the matriarchy that Ken has been steered to just obsessing over Barbie. He lives in a society where he has no ability to pursue his interests or find his purpose. My guy doesn't even have a house. Ken has no autonomy, and Barbie just reimposed the system that put him in that position with the promise of eventual equality down the line. Great. Although the patriarchy might not have solved all of Ken's problems, it certainly does a lot to help him. I mean, he goes from homeless to being the leader of society and having a mojo dojo casa house. It puzzles me that shows like The Sopranos or Boardwalk Empire handle this so much better. The women in these shows actually live in a patriarchy. There might be professional women at the same time. However, the structure of the institution they find themselves is one. Most of them are homemakers. They have very few skills and by de facto mostly rely on the husbands. They might have been sold a vision of motherhood, a largely easygoing life where their family demands respect while living in luxury at the same time with their loving husbands. Reality, though, is something far different. They are caught in abusive, traumatic relationships. At best, their partners are largely ambivalent and only cheat on them occasionally. At worst, they are abusers who inflict massive amounts of physical and mental abuse. You might be asking, why don't they just leave, find themselves, blaze a path on their own, but they really can't. They're forced to deal with their husband's impropriety, and it leads to betrayal, depression, and much worse. It's so bad, in fact, that Pussy's wife can only make something of herself once her husband is killed, and she takes over the car business. At first, she can't handle it, but eventually, through all the trials and tribulations, she makes it. Carmela drives an expensive car too. The difference is that Angie earned it with her own money.
Is that a Porsche?
Had my eye on it for months. It's a gift from Tony.
I thought about a Boxster, but I don't know. The vet felt more like me.
You bought that yourself?
The accountant says I'm better off owning it outright.
Boardwalk Empire highlights this disparity even more, taking place during Prohibition, at a time where women can't even vote. Women rely on their husbands almost exclusively, meaning that their lives are seemingly dictated by someone else entirely. End up with an abusive drunk? Well, you're screwed. The women in this world have basically nothing without a man, and those who don't must rely on their sexuality. It's sad, depressing, and ultimately a result of living in a repressive society. But they should have watched the Barbie movie, which tells you to find yourself, I guess. Simply expressing this platitude after what has occurred throughout the film and where Ken finds himself at the end is tone deaf. For all the negatives I've gone on to state, I don't think it's the worst film ever made. The production design is immaculate, and Ryan Gosling is phenomenal. In fact, anything to do with Ken in this movie is great. Ryan Gosling nails the character, and the journey of Ken discovering the patriarchy are some of the best parts of the film. He has a continuous arc throughout the film that follows a pretty logical sequence of events while still being entertaining and while delivering a message that is far more subtly conveyed. The ending musical was by far my favorite part of the film, and given how much I hate dance numbers, this says a lot. This ultimately led me to ask the question. This movie definitely has something, given how much I enjoyed and related to the Ken material. Maybe for women, it was the same experience during the Barbie parts. Maybe it did connect in a way to a woman that I don't understand. Many of the film's sensibilities just don't interest me, and I'm fine with that. But that does not give a film a pass for lazy exposition and in-your-face, preachy politics. A better script would have weaved the themes and messages more subtly through the entire film. I mean, heck, it already is done in the Ken movie. But unfortunately, sifting through all the Barbie parts to find Ken was just not enough. The final rating is a Ken out of 10.